Hey guys, as we wind down tonight, we gently push open a creaky wooden door, the handle cold, like the heart of someone freshly dumped, and step into a space that's dark, damp, and carries a scent that feels like someone mixed ale, sweat, and a very bad decision. This is a medieval tavern, where candlelight flickers like it's trying to send a distress signal, where the floor is as sticky as a caramel tragedy, and where laughter, swearing, and the sound of someone slapping someone else all blend into one beautifully chaotic symphony. To your left, someone's drinking ale from a bowl. To your right, a chicken stares at you with unsettling judgment. And right in front of you, there's an empty seat, still warm from the last person who left, likely because they couldn't handle the foot odor of their neighbor. Careful now, you might think you're just here for fun, but the truth is, you might not survive this story. Or at least, not the tavern's special stew tonight. So before you settle in, feel free to give the video a like and hit subscribe if you're truly enjoying the journey. And hey, before that first mug is poured, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now in your local tavern. Whether it's midnight in Hanoi or early morning in Saigon, tonight we're stepping into a world where chaos is just another form of politeness, and a proper dinner might include a light fistfight between two elderly men over an onion. Welcome, have a seat, and maybe don't inhale too deeply. Chapter 1. Entering the Tavern. The first slap comes from the smell. You haven't truly visited a medieval tavern until you've smelled one. And no, this isn't some passing whiff of toasted bread and dry hay. This is the kind of smell that makes your nose consider quitting, without notice or severance pay. The moment you push open the rickety wooden door, which might be oak, or just a broken table propped upright, you're greeted by a wave of warmth. Not the cozy kind, not blanket warmth or candlelight glow, but the damp, clinging kind, the kind of heat that feels like it has memories. The first scent to hit you is over-fermented ale, tangled with rotting straw, and just a hint of resentment from a dog that's been sleeping in the corner for 3 unwashed seasons. The second is human sweat, not of one person, but a collective effort. The aroma of manual labor packed too closely in an underventilated space, full of overexpressed feelings. The third, unidentifiable, could be old beef broth, could be part of someone. If you're picturing a cozy pub with polished wooden tables, warm amber lights through clean glasses, you're in the wrong century. Here, the tables are rough planks, the chairs are failed logs, and the lighting comes from glowing coals, lit with chicken feathers and whispered regrets. The space has no real geometry. Corners where light refuses to go. A ceiling just low enough to encourage humility and occasional head injuries. Sounds echo from everywhere. A throaty laugh from someone who's had more drinks than teeth. A ladle hitting a pot in rhythm or not. Footsteps dragging. Unclear if drunk, wounded, or both. And stories. There's always someone telling a story. Of their youth. Of a dragon no one ever saw. Of an ex-lover. Or maybe an ex-chicken. In the center stands a large communal table. No one sits dead center. That's the danger zone. It's where you might suddenly be asked to sing. Or split the bill. 2 acts that any sober person would avoid. On the table are stains of mysterious origin. Could be ale. Could be nosebleed. Could be the physical form of despair, congealed overnight. The right corner of the tavern is for the silent types. They don't talk much. They don't laugh much. And they never leave with anyone. They just drink, quietly, as if swallowing their past mistakes. At 3 coins a cup. The left side is livelier. A group is playing dice. One yells from losing. One yells from being stabbed. It's unclear who's winning. You try to find a seat. The chair looks like it used to be a chair. Now it's more of a suggestion, a vague idea of posture. You sit. It creaks like it's recounting a divorce it never got over. The table is cold. The cup is cloudy. And from somewhere, a hand appears, placing before you a mug of cloudy amber liquid with a film of grease, as thin as a bad memory. You look at the cup. The cup looks at you. Neither side wins. The server doesn't speak. They nod, like you've just signed a binding life or death agreement. You want to ask, "What is this?" But then you remember the tavern rule. If you ask here, you'll find out. And sometimes the knowing is the worst part. So you sip. Just a little. The first sensation is heat, unclear whether from temperature or your soul momentarily leaving. The second, the taste of dry grass, bitter roots, and fear that has been fermented. You're not sure if it's alcoholic, but you're sure of one thing. You are in the right place and the wrong time. Around you, life continues. Talking, singing, falling off chairs. Someone has passed out face down in bread older than the village's average lifespan. Someone else stands up, shouts, then sits again, maybe just checking they're still alive. And you, in the middle of all this, realize something quietly profound, that you've never been more grateful to be lying in bed, listening to this story, instead of actually living it. You've entered now. The smell still clings to your imaginary clothes. The drink isn't finished, and the story has only just begun. Chapter 2. Everyone gets in, except those who don't. The door to a medieval tavern was never locked, not out of hospitality, but because no one had anything worth stealing. If you were a traveler, a shepherd, a debtor on the run, a monk in a faith crisis, or just someone who wasn't entirely sure what day it was, congratulations. You qualified for entry. No passport, no coins. Just the unmistakable scent of someone who survived at least one brutal winter and hasn't bathed since. However, though it may seem like everyone is welcome, not everyone gets to stay. There was a blacklist, unwritten, unposted, existing only in the barkeep's squint, the server's slight nod, and the sudden silence of a soup ladle halting mid-stir when that person walked in. The first band, Rufus the Ranter, who once recited poetry for 3 straight hours using only 2 words, death and taxes. Second, Maggot Eye Edna, who once resurrected a stew through sheer belief and maggots. Third, Father Alric, who tried to preach mid-ale and dropped his homemade Holy Grail into the pickled cabbage. Conversely, some folks were always welcome, money or not. Maybe they once saved the barkeep's life, or maybe they saved a precious keg from toppling, or maybe they just drank quietly, regularly, and never vomited in the fireplace. Nothing needed to be said. Just one familiar face, and the entire tavern would silently nod. Ah, tonight will be interesting. The tavern's social structure was fairly simple. No kings, no nobles, no official vaults. Just 3 classes. Those who just walked in, hopeful and suspiciously clean. Those drinking, starting to recline, starting to share past regrets, as if they were love poems. Those you should not disturb, statues in human form. One hand on their drink, one on their grudges. Touch them, and you'll learn a lesson not taught in any monastery. There was an unspoken rule. If 3 people turn to look at you when you enter, you're fine. If 7 turn to look, you should probably leave. And if no one turns, you're already too late. The most suspicious visitors were often those who laughed too much, carried clean belongings, knew what day it was, or, worst of all, didn't drink. Not drinking was the ultimate offense. Not because it lost the tavern money, but because no one trusted a sober person who still chose to be here. Some strangers entered like they were somebody. Flowing cloaks, distant gazes, voices with exclamation marks. They'd sit center tavern, raise 2 fingers like they were conducting an orchestra, and order a drink. 5 minutes later, they were either being insulted or unknowingly paying for everyone's drinks. This was known as the arrogance tax. Once, a merchant from the big city strolled in with a silver belt, soft leather shoes, and a question. "Do you have a wine that pairs well with venison?" 3 people laughed. One held his breath. The last called the dog outside. The merchant never came back. But his shoes did. Now mounted on the wall, beneath a crooked sign that reads, "Don't be this guy." Sometimes people didn't enter through the door. They were dragged in, or crawled in, or fell through the roof. But the tavern had a clear policy. If you come in through any hole, you may order a drink, and some never left. Like the man in the corner. No one remembered when he arrived. Every night he ordered 1 cup, stared into the fire, and chuckled when someone tripped. He never spoke, never fought, never used the privy. Some say he's a ghost, stuck in debt. Others swear he's a tax collector, in a very poor disguise. Either way, he's still there. And if you accidentally sit in his spot when he steps away, the seat will be warm in a very unsettling way. The door remains open. Cold winds creep in, like unspoken stories from forgotten years. People come, people go, people stay. And the blacklist stays open-ended. Any night could be your first, or your last. So if you're listening to this story and imagining yourself stepping in, greeted with a smile, a warm ale, and a seat near the fire, I'm sorry. You just described the first person who gets thrown out for dreaming at the wrong time. Chapter 3. The Tavern Keeper, the only ruler without a throne. People often assume that power in the Middle Ages rested with kings, bishops, or some lord who owned 3 castles, 200 soldiers, and a golden candle collection. But no. True power belonged to the one who poured the ale and never smiled, the tavern keeper. No one knows his real name. Most just call him Old Man, or more respectfully, yes sir, right away. He needed no introduction, no nameplate, no sword, just a look. A look that could sober up a drunk, that could make a mercenary apologize, in a language he never even learned. He wasn't big, but in his presence, everyone felt smaller. Like a candle shrinks in the wind. Like pride shrinks when you realize you just drank foot wash, thinking it was herbal wine. His back was hunched, perhaps from a lifetime of carrying soup pots filled with the moral failings of mankind. His eyes were small, sunken, and the color of sleepless nights spent counting coins down to the last copper. His lips were always pressed tight, like he was weighing whether to forgive or flatten. Rumor had it, he once knocked out 3 thieves using nothing but a soup ladle and a disapproving glance. He once hurled a barrel of ale at a tax collector, then charged him a conscience-cleaning fee. He once laughed, just once, and that day frogs rained from the sky. He didn't speak much, and even when he did, it was always one of 3 lines, rotated as needed. Another drink? Drag him outside. Break a glass, lose a head. Not a metaphor. One time, a young noble walked in. Velvet cloak, smug grin, and a question brimming with entitlement. "Do you know who I am?" The tavern keeper looked, slowly nodded, then replied, "No, but your drink still requires payment, up front." He didn't need assistance. Only his wife, known as Sis, ma'am, or please don't hit me, depending on who you asked. She did the accounting, the scolding, and kept the debt book in her memory. A memory so sharp, if it were used for literature, human civilization would have skipped 4 centuries. The tavern keeper had a nightly ritual. Before closing time, or before the last customer passed out, he would sit in the corner of the bar, silent, gazing through the small window where the night breeze slipped in, carrying the hoot of owls and the scent of horse dung. Once someone asked, "What are you thinking about?" He didn't reply, just slid a mug of ale toward the man. There was a fly in it. The man said nothing and never asked again. He had a staff for dealing with troublemakers, called a staff, but it was really a broomstick wrapped in goat leather and studded with iron nails, long enough to reach across the bar and still touch someone's face. No one knew where he got it. Everyone knew. It had been used, frequently. The children in town believed if you lied, your mother would scold you. If you stole, your father would beat you. But if you spilled ale in the tavern keeper would come. No one knew how. Through the woods, maybe, or up from beneath the floorboards. But he would come, and his gaze would make you clean the mess, apologize to your ancestors, and join a monastery. And yet, sometimes, he was kind. Like that winter night, when a vagrant collapsed at the door. He pulled the man inside, placed him near the fire, and handed him a bowl of soup. No words, no bill, just a nod, as if to say, "I've been that cold too. And I once had no one to pour soup for me." The moment passed quickly. The next morning, the man woke and was charged 2 coins. Internal organ warming fee. Someone once asked, "What do you live for?" He answered, in a rare moment of speech, "I like watching people get drunk, because when they're drunk, they're honest. When they're sober, they lie, fake a smile, and disappear." He is the tavern keeper. No throne, no army, just a dish rag and a frown strong enough to overthrow a republic. And if you've ever entered this tavern, seen him, sat quietly, left in one piece, then whether you realize it or not, you were spared. Chapter 4. Ale, honey, and things you shouldn't be drinking. In our modern times, ordering a drink is a simple act. You look at a menu, you point, you receive a glass, you sip. In a medieval tavern, ordering a drink was more like participating in a ritual. A dangerous one. Like buying a lottery ticket. Except the prize is diarrhea. You begin with a simple question. What do you have to drink? And the server will return a gaze. Tired, eternal, forged from centuries of hearing the exact same question. She won't answer. She'll just point to a row of stacked wooden barrels, each marked with strange symbols. A 3-legged chicken, a missing tooth, a crying cloud, and a brown blotch that could be ink or an accident. You ask, "What are these?" She shrugs. The one with bubbles is ale. The one with bees is mead. The one with flies is a specialty. Ale, the golden liquid that's never clear. Ale is the most common drink. Not because it tastes good, but because it's cheap, easy to brew, and can be used to disinfect wounds, in emergencies, and in the absence of better options. It's made from barley, wild yeast, and the belief that boiling something long enough will kill all sin. It has no fizz, no chill, no aroma, but it does have floating bits, thick foam, and an aftertaste like your tongue is being punished for a crime you haven't committed yet. If you take a sip and feel like you just licked wet grass mixed with graveyard dirt, congratulations, that's the right one. Mead. Honey wine for those who still believe. Mead is honey wine, the drink of poets, legends, and those who still think the world might contain sweetness. It's made of honey, water, and yeast. Fermented anywhere from a few days to a few seasons. The good stuff is crystal clear amber, faintly floral, and smooth. The kind found here is viscous, sticky, and clings to your memories. Some take one sip of mead, sigh, and start quoting poetry. Others take two, weep loudly, and shout the name of an ex-lover who married their cousin. In short, it works. Just not in a safe way. Cider. When apples ferment and dreams go sour, cider is the gentler option. Sour-sweet, aromatic, and only occasionally contains worms. This tavern serves three kinds: actual cider, made from apples; recycled cider, made from yesterday's leftovers; imaginary cider, made from fermented rainwater and the brewer's tears. You won't know which one you're drinking. And honestly, you shouldn't ask. And the things you shouldn't order. But someone always does. Every tavern has one fearless customer. The one who, after 3 drinks, slams the table and shouts, "Give me your strongest." The room falls silent. The server doesn't ask again. She simply pours a dark green liquid, faintly steaming, faintly glowing. The customer drinks, smiles, and then collapses like a feudal debt. There's one drink known as Soul Awakener, said to be brewed from herbs, roots, mysterious mushrooms, and a prehistoric curse. One sip, and you forget a relative, but remember a past life. The last person to drink it woke up fluent in Latin and claimed to be the Pope. He now lives in the chicken coop behind the tavern. Some guests, inexplicably, still ask, "Do you have water?" The answer is usually silence. Then a nod, followed by a wooden cup of murky liquid with something swimming inside. It waves at you. Drinking water in a medieval tavern is an act filed under the same category as death by wooden spoon. But truthfully, what you drink matters less than who you drink with and what you're trying to forget. Some drink to remember the dead. Some drink to forget the living. Some drink because the only other option is talking to the wall. And the wall isn't kind. It listens, but it also leaks, and you's sitting there, hand wrapped around a cup, as old fermentation swirls gently around your nostrils, will slowly come to realize this isn't a tavern. It's a place where people pour sorrow into cups, rage into the bottom of their mugs, and hope drunkenness is the cheapest cure for loneliness. You lean back, eyes closed. The tavern noise fades into the distance. Only the echo of your drink remains. A touch of sweetness, a trace of bitterness, and a whole lot of things better left unnamed. Chapter 5. A menu of things you'll regret eating. You think you're ready. You've smelled the cloudy ale, seen the grease-stained tables, heard the sound of someone falling off a chair for reasons no one dared to ask. You've ordered a mug of mead with the aftertaste of a memory that was buried alive. You think that's enough, until the menu arrives. The medieval tavern menu is not a piece of paper. No print, no handwriting, no illustrations. It's the cook's mouth, an ageless woman, but not scarless. A knife mark runs from her neck to her jaw like a grim signature. She doesn't speak loudly. She doesn't emphasize. She just stands there, muttering. Today we have bread, some stew, and the remainder of yesterday's dish, if it hasn't molded yet. You ask, any specials? She looks at you as if you just asked for an organic kale salad with vinaigrette. Special? Oh yes. We call it the surprise dish. Everyone's surprised because they're still alive afterward. Bread a weapon in disguise. Medieval bread wasn't soft, wasn't white, wasn't fragrant. It was hard as stone, but not useful in construction. Take a bite and you'll understand why dentists were unnecessary, because there were no teeth left to fix. Bread was aged. Not because it didn't sell, but because whether it sold or not, it stayed the same. Some used bread to wedge wobbly tables. Some used it to throw at rats. Only the truly starving dared call it the main course. Perpetual stew, where ingredients go to die, together, a large pot in the kitchen corner. The fire under it never goes out. The pot itself is never washed, and it never all has a recipe. They call it perpetual stew. Each day, you just throw something else in. Chicken bones, turnips, fish heads, rumors, and the vague belief that longer boiling equals safety. The liquid isn't cloudy or clear. It's the color of postponed responsibility. You scoop a spoonful. Something slippery slides off the edge. You don't chase it, because you don't want to know. Meet a guessing game with consequences. In this tavern, you don't ask, what kind of meat is this? You ask, is it still breathing? The meat hangs near the fire. No refrigeration. No preservation. Sometimes there are flies. Sometimes people look at it and leave in silence. Some days it's chicken. Some days it's rabbit. Some days it's a creature that science has yet to categorize. Seasoning. Luxury for those willing to die. By scent. There are two spices available, salt and rebellion. Salt is expensive, so they use it sparingly. Sparse here means you can only taste it if you close your eyes, pinch your nose, and pretend you're eating something else. Once a traveler asked, "Do you have pepper?" The reply was, "Yes, in dreams." Presentation. Why you should close your eyes before eating. Dishes are served on wooden plates, broken pottery, or directly on the table. Spoons are shared. Knives are personal belongings. Forks haven't been invented yet. The best way to eat, with your hands, with stale bread, shaped like a shovel, with sheer will. Some choose to eat by watching others and using imagination. Highly effective. Zero risk of food poisoning. There's a regular guest, shows up every night, orders the special, eats in silence. Never comments, never compliments, never gets sick. People call him the Iron Stomach Saint. He once disappeared for 3 days. Everyone assumed he died. But no, he simply choked on a fish bone hidden in a rabbit leg. Sometimes, you don't know what you're eating. You don't know if the dish is official or just something swept off the floor and given a name. But you eat it anyway, because your stomach is growling, and because it's best to eat it while it's still warm or still alive. And when you set your spoon down, stare into your empty plate, and still feel okay, you begin to understand why people keep coming back. Not because it's delicious, not because it's clean, but because, in this place, a meal might not bring you joy, but surviving it, that's a victory. Chapter 6. Rickety chairs and why everyone ends up sitting on the floor. Sitting is a simple act. Everyone thinks so. Until they try to sit in a medieval tavern. Here, sitting is an art. And every successful sit is a small miracle. like taking off your shoes without losing a toenail. A chair, in theory, is an object that supports the human body at rest. But the chairs in this tavern fundamentally reject that idea. You walk in and see an empty chair. It looks okay. Not wobbly, not infested. No visible signs of prior trauma. You smile. Step forward. Sit down and hear a sound, like a god sighing in disappointment. The chair groans. Not in protest, just a deep ancestral regret. You try to adjust your posture. The chair also adjusts, in the opposite direction, and instead of sitting, you now appear to be performing hip-focused interpretive yoga. Some chairs have 3 legs. One went missing during a brawl no one speaks of. Some have only 2 legs, and a long list of whispered curses beneath each attempted use. Some chairs used to be chairs. Now they are wooden sculptures, themed around disappointment and lower back pain. Once a server warned a new guest, "Sit in that one, but don't move. If you move, you might as well lie down completely." Some choose another option. They sit on the floor. Not because they're simple, but because they're smart. The floor is dirty. There's straw, breadcrumbs, cat fur, or something furred and unnamed. But at least, the floor doesn't betray you. There's one seat of honor in the tavern, the wall chair, back against the wall. Rear on a plank that hasn't rotted yet. Mind repeating the mantra, "Today, I will not fall." That seat is reserved for elders, regulars, or those unlikely to wake again. At the other end, there's a chair no one touches. That chair has eaten 3 people. No one knows how. They sat and slipped into another reality. One man vanished for 17 minutes. When he returned, he spoke with a different accent and hated beer. No one sits there now. They rest mugs on it. It's called the side table. One night, a large man walked in, ordered a large drink, picked the largest chair, sat. There was a crack, like thunder. Silence. Then, the chair split into 4. Not 3, not 2, 4. One piece hit the kitchen. One hit the hearth. One was kept as a warning stick for future guests. Since then, no one sits on faith alone. They test. Tap lightly. Wiggle gently. Whisper a prayer. Or hover with half a cheek. Balancing on 2 toes, holding a drink in one hand and the floor in the other. Not comfortable, but at least you don't end up on the tavern's injury list, also known as the October chair incident. There's an old man, once a carpenter. He drinks nightly, sitting on a log he brings himself, called the old man's chair. No one else is allowed. If someone tries, they get a 45-minute lecture on gravity, support, and why modern chairs are an insult to the craft. People leave him alone and respect him, because he's the only one who sits in comfort and still stands up afterward. As the night wears on and the ale sinks deeper, people stop caring what a chair is. They sit or collapse, or turn fellow drinkers into furniture. One small man was once sat on for 3 hours. No one noticed, because he fell asleep. And when he woke, he simply said, "I feel valued." Chairs in a medieval tavern are not just furniture. They are characters, with personalities, with histories, and a tendency to retaliate when disrespected. If you're listening to this in bed, soft mattress, gentle pillow, uninjured spine, be grateful. Because somewhere centuries ago, someone was sitting on hope and falling on reality. Chapter 7. Folk games, dice, and a forehead injury. In the dim glow of a dying candle and the bubbling of soup that sounded like a pair of lungs giving up, You hear a repeating sound. Light, fast, rhythmic, click, click, click. It's not rain. It's not rats dancing on the beams above. It's the sound of dice rolling across a tabletop, one littered with crumbs and the dried blood of winters past. Games are the one thing in a medieval tavern that make everyone, drunk, bruised, or freshly pecked by a chicken, snap back to full alertness. Because games aren't just for fun. They're the only way to pay off a debt, win a meal, lose a finger, or sometimes, all at once, there are many games. Too many. Some have rules, some have endings. Best just end in blood. Dice games, when fate comes in two. Chipped cubes. Medieval dice weren't made of plastic. They were made of bone, wood, or parts of creatures no one wanted back. They were crooked, uneven, and seemed to have opinions. Each throw wasn't just a bet of coin, but of dignity, honor, and where you'd be sitting tonight. Some threw dice like casting hope. Some threw like launching rocks at fate. Some threw and cried. Not because they lost, but because the dice bounced off the table and into the soup bowl of someone who did not forgive. Coin stabbing with a dagger. Simple in name, not in outcome. The rules are straightforward. Place a coin on the table. Stab it with a dagger, without stabbing yourself. Easy. Until drink number 3, or until you're standing beside someone who can't remember which hand is theirs. One night, a man lost 4 rounds in a row. The coin remained. His fingers did not. They found the severed finger, placed it next to the coin, and called it the souvenir of the night. Rooster bet. Not for the impatient, rules are simple. Stare at the tavern chicken. Whoever correctly guesses when it will crow, wins. Loser buys the rooster a wreath of greens. No one knows why. No one dares not to. Once the rooster didn't crow. For 6 hours. 3 people lost patience and started a fight. The outcome? The chicken became tomorrow's special. Lie about history for accidental poets. One person starts by telling a true historical event. The next person retells it, changing one detail. Whoever makes the most ridiculous story that still gets believed wins. One night, a battle story ended with a dragon being sued for illegal deforestation. The crowd applauded. The barkeep did not. Because the story referenced the chair that once broke his fall. But games aren't just for laughs. They're how people survive the night. Not in the biological sense, but in the mental one. Because when you've lost 4 rounds in a row, all your coins, half your bread, and been smacked on the forehead with a tankard lid for laughing at the wrong moment, you start to realize this game isn't fair. But at least it has rules. And sometimes that's all you need. There's a man who plays every night, not to win, but because it's the only time in the day he feels in control. He throws dice like apologizing to the past, nods at each result, good or bad, as if to, yes, that'll do. No one laughs at him, no one pities him. They just let him play, and when he wins, no one claps. They just pour him another drink, silently, as if honoring a sadness that knows how to roll dice. Of course, not every night is peaceful. Some nights, games turn into brawls. Some nights, brawls become games. Some nights, they play who can hold their breath the longest after being hit in the head. No one wins. One man woke up 3 days later asking for the bread he hadn't finished. If you're still listening, if you're picturing yourself sitting there, watching dice roll, hearing dry laughter, and smelling the scent of losing, then congratulations. You've just lived through another night in the tavern, where entertainment comes with the risk of blood loss, but somehow still makes people feel less alone. Chapter 8. Music begins to play. Not everyone wants to hear it. Music, they say, is a gift from the heavens. The language of the soul. The rhythm that connects hearts across centuries. In a medieval tavern, music also exists. But it feels more like an unconvincing apology, spoken through broken teeth, just as someone drops a lute into a pot of soup. There's no schedule, no announcements, no stage, no spotlight. Just one person who stands up, uninvited, and decides to believe in a talent no one has ever verified. He might be a wandering minstrel, or he might be the guy who lost that dice game earlier, now repaying his debt through mandatory performance. The instrument could be a chewed-up miniature harp, could be a flute made from bone, or a tin bucket played rhythmically with a real shin bone. The sound begins. It is not gentle. It is not melodic. It sounds like a cat trying to express its inner turmoil, using a spoon. The first song is a ballad. A tragic love story about a girl, a boy, and a turnip that accidentally caused both their deaths. Every chorus is punctuated by hee-ha-hoo-hoo, hee-ha-hoo-hoo. No one knows why. No one dares ask. The old say, it's tradition. The young say, they were probably dropped as a baby. Some nights, the performer is the old man in the corner, toothless. No strings on his instrument. Just two empty mugs he bangs together, humming through his nose. No one joins in, but everyone listens. Because he's the only man alive who once survived, singing the tavern keeper's wife's name incorrectly. Some come to hear the music. Some stay because they didn't realize it had started. Some sing along. Offbeat, off-key, and somehow exactly in the right emotional tone. Any song can become a shout. Any shout can become an insult. Any insult might turn into a food fight with artistic overtones. And yet, on some nights, music really happens. Not from instruments, but from the clink of spoons on the bottom of a pot. The clatter of mugs toasting one another. The collective sigh of 7 people rejected by love on the same rainy evening. One man once sang so high-pitched, dogs started barking. Not tavern dogs, village dogs. He was escorted out, not with words, with a broken lute used like a paddle to guide him toward the exit. Sometimes someone brings a real instrument, stringed lutes, wooden flutes, sheepskin drums. They play with real skill, real effort, and are quickly drowned out by a man at the next table telling a story about getting dumped in the rain and hit with a shovel. The tavern audience is not generous. They don't clap. They don't boo. They see glance. 1 nod, not bad. 2 nods, getting long. 3 nods, stop now or I will throw an imaginary fork at your face. The most popular song is titled, "Oh My Love, Why Did You Leave Before the Soup Was Boiling?" The lyrics repeat. The melody does not change. The song ends with someone yawning. Someone once cried while listening to a song, not from emotion, but because the lyrics described his life perfectly and got his lover's name completely wrong. Music here isn't meant to please. It exists to fill the silence between 2 drinks, to remind you that in a world full of rough edges, there are still people who choose to hum instead of scream. And sometimes when you sit there, cup empty, head tilted, eyes half closed, next to someone tapping a spoon against their own knee in time, you might feel a moment. A small, lopsided moment of peace, not because the music is good, but because it's consistently bad, like life, but with flutes. Here is the English translation of your passage, preserving the deadpan tone, surreal humor, and introspective absurdity of your boring history. For Sleep Series. Chapter 9. When the fun turns into a fight. There's a rule no one ever wrote down, no one ever taught, and no one ever questioned. If a medieval tavern has all three elements, music, alcohol, and people, then a fight is not a question of if, but what minute. Not, will there be a brawl, but rather, when, between whom, and which chair dies first. You can feel it coming. Not with your eyes, but with your skin. The air changes. The temperature rises. Unclear whether from the fireplace or from two men in matching sheepskin coats trying to speak politely through clenched fists. Every brawl begins with something small. A glance that lasts a bit too long. A chorus sung off-key. A sneeze in the wrong direction. Or, the classic scenario, someone sits in the seat of the cousin of the friend of the man who once shared a bed with somebody's wife. Yes, it's that complicated, and no one has a relationship chart. Brawls typically unfold in three phases. Phase 1, what's going on? A spoon drops, a chair scrapes, a vague escapes from a dark corner. Phase 2, oh, here we go again. Tables shift, drinks spill. A loaf of stale bread sails through the air, carrying with it a misunderstood wish for peace. Phase 3, run. Someone stands up. Someone else gets knocked over. Someone trips on the dog. Someone continues eating. Weapons in tavern fights are wonderfully diverse. No swords, no spears, just wobbly-legged chairs, copper ladles, and the occasional wedge of ancient cheese used as a projectile. Some fight with mugs, others with words. A few, with poetry so terrible the opponent forfeits on emotional grounds. One night, the brawl lasted 4 minutes. No injuries. Just one chair lost its backrest, and a panicked chicken laid an egg on the barkeep's head. They called it a peaceful evening. The tavern keeper doesn't intervene right away. He watches, sips his drink, nods like he's observing a Shakespearean play, performed by the uneducated and the underfed. When he finally stands, usually after the third head slam, the room goes quiet, as if someone poured cold water and a bill. Some fights start over reasons no one can explain. One man said it was raining. Another disagreed. Voices rose, then hands. They clawed at each other like cats, and in the end, sat down again, sharing drinks as if they hadn't just threatened each other with wooden forks. Some people, strangely enough, like being hit. Not because they're odd, but because it's the only time they feel real. A punch to the shoulder, a kick into a bench, an insult hurled like stale wine from a leaking barrel. It all serves as a reminder that they are still here, still breakable, still billed for the evening. A newcomer once asked, "Why doesn't anyone stop the fight?" An old man beside him nodded and said, "Because if you try to stop it, you're in it." Some nights, there are no fights. Not because anyone turned saintly, but because everyone was still sore from the previous night, a strangely quiet evening. Only the sound of ale pouring, spoons stirring, and someone whispering, "Are we maturing?" No, just waiting for bruises to heal. And then in the morning, people wake up with bruises, with splinters in their sleeves, with bread stuck in their hats. No one's angry, no one's sad. Just one question echoes across the room. Who paid last night? In a chaotic world, brawls aren't always about hurting. Sometimes they're about releasing emotions no one allows you to feel elsewhere. At home, you must be quiet. In the field, you must work. But in the tavern, you can shout, break chairs, and get your ear bitten, legally. Chapter 10. The Dark Corner, where secrets happen. Every tavern has a dark corner, a place where candlelight doesn't reach, where laughter falls into a hole and disappears, where everyone knows, but no one mentions. In this tavern, that corner sits to the left of the hearth, behind a heavy brown curtain, brown from time, kitchen smoke, and things that happen behind it. There's no sign that says no entry, no lock on the door. Only an unspoken rule that goes, if you step behind that curtain, make sure you've left your conscience behind. No one asks what happens back there. Those who did have moved to another village, or another gender, or another state of being, not recognized by modern medicine. The sounds that drift from behind the curtain are faint, whispers, breaths, counting, and sometimes a tapping rhythm, like fear being summoned with a spoon. Some say it's for high-stakes gambling. Others whisper it's where rebels meet. There are those who believe it houses an ancient altar dedicated to a wine god wearing a mask made of sheepskin and outdated tax maps. No one knows for sure. Only that whenever someone steps out, they don't look at anyone. They don't speak. They just pour a drink, take a long sip, and sit in silence until morning. One night, a stranger arrived. Long coat, gloved hands, a voice like a lullaby with an agenda. No one knew who he was. No one dared to ask. He scanned the room, nodded once, and walked directly toward the curtain. The tavern keeper didn't stop him. The tavern keeper's wife didn't glare. Even the dog kept its mouth shut, as if it had already learned this lesson in a previous life. Someone once peeked behind the curtain. 3 seconds later, his eyes turned gray. His mouth smiled. His ear fell off. Not dropped. Fell, like a leaf that no longer wished to listen. Since then, he lives in the tavern. He doesn't speak, just polishes glasses, and occasionally smiles at the bread. The dark corner isn't large, but inside it holds more than you'd expect. An old wooden chair, a round table, a candle that never goes out, and people who never ask each other's names. They only exchange gold, rumors, lists, and, sometimes, the right to disappear. You know the corner is real when you notice that one regular who vanishes mid-conversation and returns with a new scratch, on the neck, on the hand, or in the eyes. One night, the curtain shook with laughter. Not loud, not long. Just one dry, brittle burst like a shovel striking a coffin. The room froze. Someone dropped a spoon. The tavern keeper furrowed his brow, then nodded and resumed pouring ale. That corner, sometimes, is where those in need go. A young man, face bruised, hands trembling with a torn letter, once stepped behind the curtain. 3 days later, he returned, wearing armor, a cold smile, and a list of things to do. No one asked what happened. They only noted, since that night, not a single cat in the village meowed after midnight. Some claim the corner used to be a wine cellar. Then someone was buried alive in it, and ever since, the scent of wine never leaves. Others believe it's where unemployed assassins gather. They drink to forget the blades, laugh to forget the blood, and live because there's no one left to pay them anymore. To the tavern folk, that corner isn't frightening. It's just better left alone, like a dream you don't want to remember, but can't quite forget. If you ever sit nearby and a gust of wind pulls the curtain back, revealing a pair of eyes watching you from the shadows, you only need to do one thing. Lower your head, keep drinking, and don't ask, because in a medieval tavern, light is where people get drunk, and the darkness is where they pay for it. Chapter 11. Women in the Tavern. From servers to silent assassins. You step into a medieval tavern. Your eyes haven't adjusted to the dark. Your ears are still trying to determine whether the crash you just heard was a person or a table falling. And then you see them. Not the tavern keeper, not the self-declared musician causing second-hand migraines, not the dice thrower with 6 fingers and 3 outstanding debts, but the women. They're not in the spotlight. They don't stand on a stage. They pass by you, light as a falling spoon, leaving behind the distinct sense that if you misstep, you'll be the next one to fall. They're the servers, the pourers of ale, the ones holding the ladles. And sometimes, the ones holding the knives. People call them wenches. It sounds quaint. It's not. A wench is not a medieval bubble tea girl. She's the tavern's unofficial security force, armed with an apron and an iron spoon. They work with 2 hands, 1 glance, and a very conditional patience. They remember every regular, who drinks too much, who always shortchanges, who fakes being drunk to skip the bill, and who once touched the bread without paying. There's one named Marta. She barely reaches anyone's shoulder, but can hit a forehead with a pinch of salt from 3 tables away. Once a young soldier said something crude. No shouting, no drama. Just a quiet comment, meant for one ear. Marta turned, said nothing, and calmly poured a full mug of ale into his boot. Not hot, not cold, just perfectly timed. Another is Elska, speaks little, rarely smiles, carries her tray like it's an invisible scythe. Anyone who spills her drink wakes up the next morning to find their sandal hanging from a ceiling beam. No one saw her climb. No one heard her speak. Everyone simply agreed. Don't touch Elska's tray. The women in the tavern don't just serve. They observe. They remember. While the men repeat the same story 3 times in one night, they stand silently behind, recalling all 3 versions, noting which was true, which was drunk nostalgia, and which one could be sold to an out-of-towner for 2 coins. They know who's hiding from debt, who's hiding from a wife, who's hiding from their own life. And they never need to ask. Some of the women don't serve at all. They just sit and watch and sip from a cup that never seems to empty. No one knows what they do outside the tavern. Some say spies. Others say retired witches. Maybe they're just waiting for someone who never comes back. There's an older woman everyone calls Mother. No one dares call her anything else. Once a horse trader called her Miss. That night he slept out back, next to the compost bin and a colony of prideful rats. Mother keeps the tavern's debt book. No ink, no paper, just her eyes and her memory. Once a stranger tried to deny an old tab. She said, "It was raining that day. You wore a red coat, drank 3 mugs, vomited this. Said this ale was better than your wife's brew. You owe 3 coins and an apology." He paid both and apologized to his wife just to be safe. The women here are not gentle. They are solid, practical, and entirely contradictory. They might hand you a warm drink, then throw the cup at your head if you drink it wrong. Some say a few were once assassins, or ex-wives of assassins, or the ones who trained them. No one asks, because living with uncertainty is still better than dying with answers. They wear no silk, use no makeup, speak no flowery words. But if you need someone to look at you like, they know every mistake you've ever made, they'll do it with a single frown. In a world where men get remembered as heroes and women get named wife of, here, in the tavern, they don't belong to anyone. They belong to this place. Through steady footsteps, through firm hands, and through glances that make you adjust your posture without knowing why. If you're still listening, thinking of women you've met, strong, quiet, and always knowing more than they say, then maybe you've met someone like them before. Maybe in a tavern, maybe in a small kitchen, or maybe in your own memory on the edge of a rainy afternoon long gone. Chapter 12: Children, Chickens, and Unidentified Creatures. People usually think of taverns as adult spaces, places of alcohol, smoke, swearing, and regrettable decisions made long after midnight. But in a medieval tavern, the line between adult and child is as blurry as the color of the house stew. You might walk into the tavern in late afternoon, not even seated yet, when a child passes by, carrying a wooden knife, a very real chicken, and an expression that promises absolutely nothing good. Children in the tavern are not supervised. They don't need protecting. They simply belong here. They don't play pretend tea parties. They play real dice games, fight using stale bread, and know how to fake drunkenness just to get extra food. There's a boy named Tom, small, with hair like an angry bird's nest. He moves through the tavern like a draft of wind, collecting crumbs, grabbing empty cups, and occasionally making someone's shoe disappear without anyone knowing how. Once a drunken guest shouted about a missing coin pouch. Tom appeared, returned it, nodded, and took half the money. "Storage fee," he said. "There's a girl named Elsie, not even 10 years old, but talks like a grandmother who's survived 5 plagues and 2 divorces. Elsie can critique a dish from 3 steps away, just by smell. One time, she called the stew emotionally absent since the morning. The cook resigned, silently, for 3 days. Children here don't learn letters. They learn glances. They learn how to dodge ladles. They learn the exact words that make adults laugh, get annoyed, and give them more bread anyway. And then there are the chickens. Chickens in the tavern are not caged. They are part of the tavern's natural architecture. They wander under tables, jump on chairs, lay eggs in shoes, and once stood proudly atop the bar table to crow, as if declaring victory in a dice game. No one stopped it. No one was surprised. Someone quietly added the chicken's name to the tavern's debt ledger for spilling a beer. One white chicken, with feathers like grumpy clouds, is known as Sir Crow. He struts around the tavern like a nobleman who gave up his estate to pursue a life of grain pecking and judgment. Someone once tried to cook him. The next morning, that person woke up on the tavern roof, wrapped in bed sheets, unable to remember their name. Besides chickens and children, there are other things, unclear whether animals or design mistakes. One thing looks like a cat but walks on 2 legs. Another has a shell like a turtle, but moves as fast as a rumor spreading through cheap ale. They don't hurt anyone. They just exist. Like secrets you don't understand but learn to live beside. One night you might spot a small creature, round eyes, messy fur, like a half-formed nightmare, sitting quietly under your table, watching you as if it used to be you in a past life. You ask the server, "What is that?" She shrugs. "We call it Baby Don Vito. Don't give it ale. Last time it sang for 3 hours, in a language you'd rather forget." All the children, the chickens, and the things with legs coexist by their own rules. If you feed them, they respect you. If you step on them, you'll be punished. If you sleep under the table, you must share your spot. They don't make noise. They don't cause trouble. They're just part of the tavern's background. Like spilled ale, like dusty straw, like the feeling you're being watched by a duck who knows how to speak but hasn't decided to yet. If you're picturing a tavern filled with well-dressed adults, sitting properly, toasting each other with soft laughter, I'm sorry. You've just described a funeral. This is a tavern, where a child might sprint past you carrying 2 eggs, a rusty nail, and the vague warning that these are materials for a personal project. Chapter 13, Hygiene, a concept that never existed. There are things you don't expect too much of when entering a medieval tavern. Comfortable seating, chewable food, breathable air. But if you came hoping for hygiene, then perhaps you've misunderstood the entire century. Here, the concept of cleanliness was not neglected. It simply had not yet been invented. From the moment you walk in, your nose receives the first announcement. Not exactly fragrant, not exactly foul, but a multi-dimensional aroma composed of spilled ale of uncertain vintage, communal sweat, stray fireplace ash, and a lingering note of fermented regret. As usual, the floor is covered in straw. Not for beauty, but for absorption. Anything that falls, straw catches. Each step is a miniature archaeological dig. Fish bones, coins, shards of mirror, and sometimes a half-finished love poem discarded for poor rhyming. Drinking cups are washed by being dipped into a communal bucket, held in the air for a breeze-dry rinse, then placed back on the table with full faith in the next drinker's immune system. Someone once asked, "Is this cup clean?" The server replied, "Cleaner than mud, dirtier than God. Pick your standard." The soup ladle is a permanent fixture, never replaced, never scrubbed, only layered. Ladle, grease, soup, history. A monk once remarked, "That ladle is proof of immortality. Nothing that's touched it has ever truly been cleansed." Hand washing station exists. In a corner, a barrel of pale brown water. Inside it, a fish. Not decorative. Survivor grade. It lives in there. No one knows why, no one dares remove it. You simply dip your hands and dry them on your shirt. The latrine is a delicate subject. Not inside the tavern. Not nearby. It lives in the memories of those who once found it. The path to the latrine is marked by the haunted gaze of those returning. Its scent cannot be described, only neurologically processed. Once, a young noble visited, carried a perfumed handkerchief, wore white gloves, had a vial of scented water clipped to his belt. After 17 minutes, handkerchief, gone, gloves, discolored. Perfume, replaced by a cockroach. The scent of people in the tavern is symphonic. No one smells worse than the others. It's a harmonious blend of sweat tones. Men exude saddle musk. Women, faint onion and quiet resolve. Children smell like bread that's been roasted, then rolled through dog fur. Chickens don't smell. They don't need to. They transcend human rating systems. Tables and chairs aren't wiped down daily. They develop a natural protective crust, a mix of fat, ash, breadcrumbs, and the cursing of past patrons. Rest your hand on the table, and it feels like you've touched a half-written history. Some people eat with their hands. Some use spoons. Some just stare at the food, shake their heads, and nibble on their own disappointment. One tale recalls a man wiping his mouth with someone else's sleeve. Not on purpose, not with permission, unable to tell where he ended and another began. That's when you realize cleanliness doesn't matter. Survival does. As long as you don't swallow a toothpick by mistake. In the tavern, everything is blurred. The light, blurred. Morals, blurred. Standards, blurred. Only the smell is sharp, thick, persistent, and longer lasting than most memories. If you're still listening and your hand rests on a clean blanket next to a soft pillow in a bed that doesn't move, be grateful. You've just survived a night in a place where bacteria are legacy patrons and soap remains an underdeveloped concept. Chapter 14. When you order a beer and receive a threatening look instead. If you're imagining a medieval tavern like the cozy pubs in movies, where everyone clinks mugs, laughs heartily, and strums lutes by a warm fire, I'm sorry, you're dreaming of a century that never existed. Let me invite you back to reality. You push open the tavern door, a creaky, accusatory thing that sounds like it's reporting you to the gods. And instead of the sweet scent of fresh ale, you're greeted by a thick fog of sweat, urine, and something greasy that refuses to identify itself. The air feels like winter blankets that were never properly aired out. Take a deep breath and you'll feel your lifespan shorten by at least a few months. Inside, the lighting comes mostly from a fire doing its best to survive on damp wood and blind optimism. The rest is oil lamps, dim, flickering, struggling against the tavern's determination to stay medieval in every sense. Guests are crammed together, but no one sits up straight. Not because they're drunk, but because most of the chairs are missing a leg. A man is singing a tragic ballad about a lover who ran off with a barrel maker. He sings in a voice that makes you question whether music was ever a good idea. The tables are long and sticky. Not from polish, but from ale spilled 3 centuries ago that no one ever cleaned. There's a dark red stain, possibly wine, possibly the nosebleed of someone who accidentally said the barkeep's wife's name out loud. Don't ask. You order a beer. The server, a woman with arms like ox femurs, doesn't speak. She simply stares, like you just insulted her grandmother's soup recipe in 4 languages. 7 minutes later, the beer arrives in a chipped mug that's steaming. Not from temperature, just life. The mug makes a faint fizzing noise, possibly from yeast undergoing a surprise second fermentation. You pick it up. It's sticky. Unclear whether from the inside or the outside. You take a sip. It tastes like straw, smoke, and broken promises. Something floats inside. Maybe yeast sediment. Maybe a piece of a tavern brawl that was never fully cleaned up. You decide not to investigate further. The tavern's soundtrack is chaotic but not lively. More like a multi-generational family arguing in forgotten dialects. Each table is its own galaxy. One corner hosts 3 old men gambling with dice. Another, a man in a leather cloak selling rare bird meat that everyone knows is just church pigeons. In the darkest corner, someone with a hood is writing something on parchment, using either blood or honey. Maybe both. I don't recommend visiting the latrine. First, there isn't one. Second, the designated area is behind the tavern, where the stench rises like a scented riddle meant to destroy your sense of smell. Many choose the simpler option. Hold it in, or use a bucket and throw it into the street. A tradition that's nourished generations of rats. You feel a chill down your spine. Not fear, just wind blowing through a gap in the wooden wall wide enough to fit a hand. Someone has entered. The room goes quiet. A knight? An assassin? No. Just the tavern owner's wife. And clearly someone inside owes her a cast iron pot and an apology. They intend to return neither. Want to order food? That's unfortunate. There is no menu. You ask, what's on today? The answer is usually whatever's left. What arrives on the plate might be turnip stew, or yesterday's turnip stew reheated by someone breathing on it. Is there meat? Of course, bony meat, unidentified meat, and, if you're lucky, a piece of fat still wearing a hair. Every loud sound makes the room pause for a beat. Not from surprise, but to assess whether it's time to run. Taverns, after all, are gathering places for tax evaders, unemployed knights, and people who believe beer is a way to speak with the dead. You laugh? Be careful. They might invite you to join the conversation. And yet, beneath the grime, the noise, the danger, the discomfort, the medieval tavern still fulfills one vital role. It is the only place where you're allowed to truly be yourself. No laundry, no calendars, no pretending. You sit, you drink, you exaggerate stories. You laugh at someone else's misfortune, and you complain about the price of everything. And when it's late, when the last lamp flickers like a dying firefly, the barkeep nods off behind the counter, and guests sit still like drunken statues. You realize this damp, half-mildewed, half-hallucinated cavern is exactly where you belong. Another drink? Sure, why not? But this time, maybe ask if that cup was recently used to trap a cricket. Chapter 15. The Splintered Chair, the Damp Seat, and the Confessions no one asked for. You've made it into the tavern. Congratulations! You still have your teeth. A small victory in an age where teeth were rare. And rarer still after saying, "Pour me another." But now, having secured a seat, or rather, having been chosen by a seat, since all the others are occupied by mysterious shapes, swimming in smoke and burps, you're confronted with an uncomfortable truth. Your chair is wet. Not the recently cleaned kind of wet. The mysterious kind of wet. You don't ask why. In a medieval tavern, there are questions that, once asked, will cost you 3 sleepless nights. 4, if you have a vivid imagination. You shift your weight. A splinter jabs into your back. The pain is nostalgic, as if the chair is trying to tell a story, a long one, with pus. In front of you sits a man whose beard has evolved into a personal subway system for bedbugs. He's holding a ceramic jug containing a liquid that, if tested, would reveal at least 4 strains of yeast, 2 types of mollusk, and the faint aftertaste of regret. He looks at you. You look at him. You try to avoid eye contact. Too late. "Kid," he begins, "I used to be a lute player." You know this type. Every tavern has at least one. A person carrying a tragic symphony in their chest, played on the broken strings of memory, and performed unsolicited. He tells you about a lost love, a duel in the rain, a horse named Gertrude, and the time he was wanted for playing funeral music at a wedding. You nod. Your eyes droop. You don't catch all the words, but the rhythm of his voice begins to blend with the wind hissing through the cracks in the walls. It's oddly soothing. At the next table, an argument erupts over who first invented leftover soup reheated 3 times. A loud woman insists it was her grandmother. A thin man points to an old pot hanging on the wall and declares, "That's my ancestor, when he was alive." No one is shocked, perhaps because it has happened before. In another corner, someone is dozing off, head against the wall, lips mumbling words that belong to no known language. Maybe he's dreaming. Maybe he's communicating with a minor god who governs spoiled wine and bad decisions. You glance around. There's a cat, or something cat-adjacent. It strolls past your feet without permission, disappearing under the table like an old soul that refuses to leave the bar. Some say it's the ghost of a nobleman who died after drinking vinegar mixed with lamp oil. Laughter erupts, the raspy kind, like lungs made of moldy bread. Someone just told a joke. No one understood all the words. That's fine. In a medieval tavern, laughter doesn't require a reason, just alcohol and maybe a little despair. You return to your beer. The foam has long since vanished, leaving a film that drifts aimlessly, like the memory of a regrettable night. You take another sip. Not better, not worse. That's a good sign. The tavern now feels like a giant belly, warm, damp, stuffed with people and sounds, slowly fermenting its contents. You feel yourself soaking in it too, in the noise, in the smells, in the sweet sensation of not currently being a peasant in the fields. The tavern keeper walks past. He glances at you, then at your mug, says nothing, just nods slightly, A gesture that says he knows everything. That you don't normally drink beer. That you're pretending to belong. That you accidentally sat on his son's chair. And he's deciding whether to forgive you or quietly raise the beer price by a silver coin next time. No one argues. No one leaves. Everyone stays, as if the world outside is a different realm altogether. A realm where you have to farm, wake early, wash clothes by hand, and speak to people you dislike. Here at least you can dislike each other, in silence. The tavern, after all, isn't a place to be joyful. It's a place to not be miserable alone. You hear a stringed instrument, not a song, just a few notes. Low, delayed, like a sigh in musical form. Someone begins to hum along. The lyrics are lost after the third line, but who cares? Someone else taps the rhythm with a spoon, a chipped wooden spoon. But it keeps time better than most hearts ever have. You sigh. Not from tiredness, but from that feeling of being sad, warm, and not quite sure if this is reality. And that's when it hits you. In the unbearable grime of this tavern, there is something that feels a lot like acceptance. Chapter 16, when the night slipped into the ale and everyone forgot who they were. When you step into a medieval tavern, time seems to stop. Not in the romantic, it stopped because the moment was too beautiful way. But in the more literal sense, clocks hadn't been invented, the lighting is poor, and everyone is too drunk to remember what day it is. Night doesn't fall with gusts of wind or distant church bells. It arrives in its own peculiar way. Another cup is poured. Another story begins. Another memory no one invited resurfaces, like mold on damp wood. The tavern is no longer rowdy. Everything begins to slow, like cold porridge in a wooden bowl. Thick, warm, and no one wants to stir it. The off-key lute in the corner has gone silent. The player has nodded off, forehead resting on a barrel, lips still mouthing the final words of a ballad about love and debt, mostly debt. Voices that once boomed are now whispers, then mere breathing. Long, deep, and tinged with resignation. A man telling a story has stopped. Not because the story ended, but because he forgot what he was saying. The listeners don't remember either. So everyone nods as if it had a perfect conclusion, even though it probably ended at, "And that's when I first met the goat in." No one asks for the rest. An old woman pours herself another drink. Her hand trembles. Her eyes look far away, as if remembering someone who used to sit beside her at this very table. Maybe a husband, maybe a son, maybe just a stranger who once laughed too loudly and vanished into the morning fog. In a medieval tavern, all memories wear the color brown, like aged wood, watery ale, and half-closed eyes mid-dream. Wind whistles through the door crack. The fire in the hearth fades. Ash floats like words never spoken. You lean on the table. The wood groans softly. Your cup is still half full. You don't want to finish it. Not because of the taste, but because an empty cup means you have no reason to stay. The air now is thick, like cooled bone broth. People remain, sitting, breathing, thinking of things they can't quite name, each with a shadow. Each shadow with a story. The man beside you stares into space, as if someone once stood there. He brushes his shoulder lightly and smiles. Maybe he's recalling a winter romance. Maybe that's the spot his wife used to punch when he was drunk. Love and violence were often hard to tell apart back then. In the corner, a child is asleep on his mother's lap. His hair clumps into shapes molded by time. The mother says nothing. She dips a piece of bread into a cup of warm water, hopefully warm, though she's no longer sure. You look up, there's a painting on the wall. Faded. Yellowed. It shows people raising their mugs around a long wooden table. All smiling. But their eyes don't smile, as if the painting wasn't made to decorate, but to remind that joy, like ale, should always be measured. A snore. Then the crackle of tired firewood. Then mouse footsteps across the ceiling beams like unpaid night watchmen. Then silence. A special kind of silence. Not the absence of sound, but a mutual agreement among strangers that no more needs to be said. Because none of us really knows how we feel. Only that under this creaky roof, we aren't alone in the not knowing. You sip again. The ale tastes softer now. Not better, just less harsh. Or maybe your throat has given up complaining. You set your mug down. The wood gives a soft reply, a signal that the tavern is still awake. The barkeep looks at you from across the room, says nothing, raises an eyebrow as if to ask, "One more," and you nod. Not because you need it, but because you're not ready to leave. Outside, rain begins to fall. Slow drops hitting the roof like a drum roll, announcing the night has fully arrived. No one says, "Let's go," because no one really wants to. Out there. It's wind, it's cold, it's tomorrow. In here, among the drunk, the sighs, and the chair still splintering into your leg, you find something familiar, not comfortable, but familiar. Like that old winter blanket that smells a bit musty, but you don't dare wash it, for fear your sleep might forget its scent. You wonder, how many people sat in this very spot before you? How many stories were told, then forgotten, then reborn in someone else's voice, on another night like this one? And when you close your eyes, hear the steady rain, the mug touch wood, someone snoring softly, like they're exhaling a whole life of sadness, you feel peace, a soggy, old, fermented kind of peace, with a hint of regret. But still, peace? Chapter 17. When the fire died but the story never did. It's well past midnight. Outside, the rain still falls, not loud, not fierce, but like an old man telling stories, each drop slow, steady, and repeating. On the tavern roof, water taps against the wooden beams, as if keeping rhythm for a song with only one note. Inside, the fire has almost died. Just a single ember glows. A half-shut, bloodshot eye watching a world that has stopped arguing. You're still here. Your beer is empty now, save for a sticky trace at the bottom and a few stray barley grains. Like forgotten memories, no one bothers to gather. No one pours another. No one asks for one. Because everyone has crossed that fragile line between drunk and merely existing. You glance around. Some may have left. Or maybe they just slid off their chairs and blended into the floorboards, naturally. In one corner, a man sleeps with his head on his arm, mouth slightly open, smiling faintly. No one knows what he's dreaming of, but it's almost certainly not the harvest. On his shoulder, a cat, or a very imaginative rat, is curled up asleep too. There's soft breathing. A chair creaks. Someone murmurs a name in their sleep, a name that doesn't belong to anyone living here anymore. Maybe they passed long ago. Maybe they never existed. You shrink into your shoulders. Your shirt feels cold, not from the weather, but because the wall behind you has sucked the warmth from centuries of human backs. Night in a medieval tavern isn't like night anywhere else. It doesn't fall into silence. It drifts, slowly, heavily, filled with voiceless whispers. A spoon clinks to the ground. No one picks it up. Because its owner has nodded off, chin on the table, lost in a memory from 10 years ago, the day he won a bet with his wife about whether turnips should count as a main course. You rest your chin on your palm. The table is cold. Your eyelids start to weigh down, like sacks of wet barley. Each blink carries a fragment of dream. A chicken in a crown, your mother's laugh inside the barkeep's face. Then comes a cough, a deep cough. A cough with history. It belongs to an old man in the corner. He's had just one drink, hasn't said a word, but his eyes have judged everything. The structure of the building, the source of the ale, your personal regrets. He says nothing. But his cough speaks volumes. You suddenly remember you meant to leave. An hour ago, or 3, or 10. No one's sure anymore. Here, time is measured by how many people fall backwards off their stools. There's an old clock on the wall. It doesn't work. But no one takes it down. Not because it tells time, but because it reminds everyone that even time, in this place, must sit and wait its turn. You hear a rustle. Someone stands up. A tall figure in a long cloak walks slowly toward the door. No one speaks. No one says goodbye. But when the door creaks open, the sound of rain rushes in like a silent curtain fall. They leave. Only you remain. And those who sleep. And those who are awake, pretending not to be. And the barkeep, still nodding off, still polishing the same spot on the counter he's been polishing for half an hour. You wonder, when morning comes, when sunlight slips into the cracks of this rotting wall, will the tavern feel any different? Will you remember what you heard tonight? Will this chair still be wet? You don't know, but you do know one thing. A night in a medieval tavern never really ends. It simply changes shape, into the weight on your shoulder, the bitterness at the back of your throat, the strange warmth when you lie down. Even if the floor is hard, the smell is human, and the blanket is borrowed from someone you never met. You close your eyes, not from tiredness, but because there's nothing left to open them for. The fire has gone out, but the story still smolders in the bottom of the glass. Chapter 18. Stepping out and leaving a piece of yourself in the splintered chair. You once thought leaving a medieval tavern would be simple. Just stand up, walk to the door, and open it, like leaving a dull meeting, or walking away from a joke you didn't understand. But no. Leaving a medieval tavern is a ritual with no words, no farewell bells, no one to see you off. Just you, your back slightly hunched from sitting too long, your backside a little numb from that chair with the splinter, and your mind fogged over with a thin layer of ale mist, like early morning dew on mustard leaves, damp, cool, and somewhat pointless. You shift. The chair creaks, not in protest, but in sorrow. This chair has held centuries of lives, traitors, secret lovers, unemployed knights, failed cooks, and an old woman who once ate 5 raw turnips on a bet. And now, it has held you. You rise. Your head swims, not from the alcohol, but because your body has grown used to the slight tilt of the tavern, a gentle tilt. Like life, always leaning toward disaster, but never quite falling into it. You look around one last time. The elderly woman snoozes over her cold cup of tea. The young man's face is beet red from falling asleep against the embers of the stove. The barkeep, possibly dreaming aloud to a wooden barrel, continues to nod, hand still polishing the same spot. You don't wake anyone, not because you're polite, but because you're afraid they might say, "Stay a bit longer." And you'd say, "Yes." You push the door open. It groans like an old man with no teeth. Cold wind rushes in. You shiver, not from the chill, but because, for the first time in hours, you hear something terrifying. The truth. No raspy laughter, no clinking mugs, no fire crackling, just rain, and earth, and a stray cat staring at you like you've just stolen its bed. You inhale deeply. The air is clean, but you already miss the old smell, stale beer, stale people, half-burnt straw, and sweat-soaked timber. The scent of a place where no one is perfect, but everyone is forgiven. You walk, slow steps, as if afraid to wake the night. The road ahead is muddy, slick, clearly once used for a cabbage soup kicking contest. You slip briefly, but regain balance, and you chuckle. Not out of joy, but because leaving a tavern without being crushed by a chair or propositioned by a ghost feels like something worth writing down. The night out here is not the same night as inside. It's wider, quieter, stranger, as if you've just stepped out of a book, and now you're walking into the part with no more words. Your footsteps splash through puddles. They don't echo. They vanish into the fog, like every story you heard in that tavern, already fading the moment they left someone's lips. You glance back. The tavern sits silent. No light, no sound. No proof it ever held an entire world. And you wonder, does it only appear at night? Do people only find it when they're not sure where they're going? Are there taverns in this world, not made of bricks and beams, but of feeling? The feeling that, in a world that is cold, wet, and full of questions, you can still sit down, speak, and not get punched. You laugh. Not quietly this time. A small laugh escapes. The wind steals it. And you walk on. No one sees you off. No one calls you back. But you know one day, perhaps at night, perhaps in a dream, perhaps while waiting for your toast, you'll find it again. The tavern, the splintered chair, the nameless ale, the story no one asked to be told, and the fire, just warm enough to make you forget the world outside is still cold. Chapter 19. The people you meet in a tavern, whose names you'll never know. There's something strange about the people you meet in a medieval tavern. You don't know who they are. They don't know who you are. And somehow, that makes everything feel closer. No introductions, no polite conversation. Just the shared act of sitting in a room dark enough that no one sees you clearly, loud enough that no one has to listen, and warm enough that no one needs to share blankets. You sit down on a chair. Yes, the same splintered one from last chapter. And yes, the splinter is still there. The person next to you glances your way, then looks away. Not out of rudeness, but because they're trying to remember if they sold you a blind mule at the market last spring. The tavern is where the lives gather, the ones not grand enough to be main characters. And that's exactly what makes them memorable. The man in the far corner, his face as pitted as a potato map, used to be a guard. He was fired for falling asleep and accidentally letting a cat climb the royal flagpole. He tells that story with quiet pride, as if the cat marked a turning point in local history. The old woman near the hearth always keeps a dried onion in her coat. No one knows why. Some say it wards off evil spirits. Others say it's a backup dinner. Some whisper she once loved a farmer and swore off marriage after he died, choking on a bean. Then there's the young man, face dirty from either soot or gambling loss, who insists he once saw a dragon on the mountain. According to him, it had 6 legs, 3 tails, and impeccable manners. It only took 1 goat, then bowed in thanks. No one believes him, but everyone listens. Because the night is long, and a polite dragon isn't the worst idea. You don't remember their names, and even if you did, they wouldn't sound like names. More like sounds. Wet shirt, purple eargrum, smells like garlic, but you remember their voices. The way they spoke of small things, a broken bowl, an off-season rain, an afternoon spent massaging a hen's feet. with the importance of discovering planetary orbits. You remember their laughter too. Not loud, not sharp, but warm. The kind of laugh that lingers like ember glow after a party no one remembers starting. There was a man everyone called Old Father Who Fathered No One. His stories were terrible. Always started with, "Back when I was young," and ended with, "Then I went home." But you nodded along anyway. Because his very existence, the torn hat, the toothless smile, the ability to smoke a pipe through his ear, was a story in itself. And there were others you never met. They left early, or faded into the walls, the shadows, the chairs. You'll never know who they were. But you'll remember the way they set their mugs down, softly, so as not to disturb the person dozing beside them. Once a man thin as wilted lettuce spoke only one sentence the whole night. "Don't order the fish stew today." No one asked why. No one doubted him. Everyone simply switched to beer. The tavern is where you get to be yourself, or a version of yourself that doesn't care how the crops are doing, doesn't worry if your ex is remarried, doesn't stress about whether tomorrow starts with farming, foraging, or a prison sentence. Here, you only need to sit, to listen, to breathe, and sometimes to laugh, even if it's just a snort when someone tells you they once tried to raise chickens using positive affirmations. And then the next morning, you leave the tavern. No goodbyes, no notes. Just a little warmth, some faint teeth marks on the wooden table, and an unfinished story. Someone else will sit where you sat. Rest their elbow on the scarred wood. Sip from a mug with the faint outline of your last drink. And in time, they too will become part of the tavern air, floating, warm, never quite distinct. You don't need to know their names. They don't need to know yours. It's enough that someday, in some tavern, someone says, "Back when I sat with a stranger and felt like I'd known them forever." And that's enough. Chapter 20. The Whisper in the Last Drink. When every story becomes just yeast and damp memory. You know, the last drink in a medieval tavern is never the one you meant to have. It's the one you drink without noticing. And by the time you do, it's already empty. Like many other things in life, your mother's last bowl of porridge, the last breath of an old cat, or the last time you believed someone would pay you back on time. The last drink isn't large, or full, or even good-looking. It's just what remains, between slow breaths, lowered gazes, and the cracked wooden table where your elbow now rests. You didn't mean to drink it. You just touched your lips to it. But once you did, you felt something needed to end. The taste of beer is no longer clear. Only yeast. And memory. Memories of a night that started. Who knows when? And no one knows where it ends. Outside, dawn hasn't arrived. But night is no longer holding. This light is the color of ash, the kind that appears only when the sky can't decide whether to carry on with darkness or allow morning in. And in this indecision, people become strangely, say, honest. You hear someone whisper, "Has anyone here ever felt regret?" No one answers. Not because no one hears, but because everyone knows. If someone starts talking, they might never stop. The tavern now feels like an old handwritten draft. Faded, smudged, but with a few lines still legible, unfinished, unrhymed, but real enough to make the reader pause and breathe. You look around. Some sleep. Some are awake pretending not to be. Some are sober pretending to be drunk. And some are drunk enough to think they just spoke to a dice-rolling owl. An old woman pours water into her cup. Water, not wine. Maybe she's had enough. Or maybe she wants to dilute something in her heart. A feeling, a name, an old dream. You ask the barkeep, "Is it still early?" He nods, then shakes his head. A common response when someone isn't sure what time it is or is thinking about a debt never collected. You don't ask again. Because you understand, barkeepers don't live off beer sales. They live off what no one says out loud. You stay seated. Not because you want to, but because you don't feel light enough to leave yet. Something in the air keeps you. Maybe it's the smoke, or the eyes of someone who just drifted off without finishing their story. A man enters, soaked, tired, eyes red, like the wind slapped him all the way here. No one asks where he came from. No one asks where he's going. There's just an empty seat, the one you were about to leave, still warm. He sits. You rise, a wordless handoff, like placing a book back on a shelf so someone else can find something they didn't know they were looking for. You leave the tavern. This time without hesitation, without looking back, without wondering if you forgot a hat or a spoon. Because you know what you left behind wasn't in your pocket, it's in the air. A small trace, faint enough to go unnoticed, but present for anyone who sits exactly where you once did. Morning light cuts through the rain still clinging to the thatched roof. The road is muddy, the wind is cool, and the quiet is deep enough that you can hear your own heartbeat. Slow, even. Like the final beat of a song no one remembers the name of. You don't know what today will be. Will it repeat itself like every other day, or shift somehow quietly? You're not sure, but you do know this. If tonight, when the sky falls and your chest feels heavy, you need a place to sit, where no one asks too much, no one laughs too loud, and no one makes you pretend to be strong, that tavern will still be there, waiting. In memory, in the callus on your hand from gripping a mug too tight, in the deep sleep that smells faintly of ash, and in a story you still haven't finished telling. Chapter 21. The memories you didn't say. When the tavern walls remember what you tried to forget. You've left the tavern. The night has passed. Morning has come, as it always does. Slow, a bit cold, and without asking permission. You return home. Take off your coat, set your mud-caked shoes by the hearth, though the fire isn't lit. Then you sit down and realize you brought nothing back with you. Yet somehow you're full of things you can't quite name. It's not the smell of ale, not exactly the words of old men. It's a kind of memory, hazy, like morning mist mixed with soot, half fading, half sinking in. You wash your face. The water is cold, but it doesn't wake you, because in your mind, the tavern sounds are still echoing. Not loud, not clear, just soft murmurs, like wind sneaking through thatched roofs on a rainy night. You sit there, staring out the window. You see a chicken pecking at the dirt, as if looking for a reason to keep going. And then you ask yourself, why do I miss that tavern so much? It's not the drinks. Honestly, most of what they poured could sober up a snail. It's not the food. You're still mildly traumatized by that bread roll hard enough to fend off flies. It's not the atmosphere. No one calls a damp, noisy room with the constant threat of being hit by a mug a dream space. So why? Because there, you didn't have to be anyone. And oddly, that made you feel like part of something. Out here, you're someone's son, the one who owes the harvest, the one paying off a debt, the one who's not allowed to cry when the dog dies. But in the tavern, you were just a person drinking. No one asked where you were from. No one asked you to prove you'd done anything worthwhile. You just had to sit, be, listen. And then, like a miracle steeped in ale, the people around you, strangers with unwashed faces, started telling you things they'd never said before. They spoke of fathers who never once said, "I'm proud of you," of wives who died before winter ended, of a chicken named Margot that used to follow flute music. You didn't know their names, but you remember their sighs at the end of each story. And now, sitting alone, you begin to remember them, not with your mind, but with your chest. That subtle clench, just enough to keep you seated a little longer, even though nothing's urgent. You look at the wall. Nothing there, just plain wood. But you imagine, if it were the tavern wall, it would remember you. It would still hold the shape of your back, the mark of your tilted cup, the sweat you left behind when you laughed at your own sadness. Tavern walls aren't painted. They aren't clean. They don't smell nice, but they remember. Not the kind of memories you'd frame, the kind you don't dare say out loud, but don't quite want to forget either. Once you heard someone say, some stories don't need to be written down, they just need to have been heard. And you believe that, because maybe you told something too. That night, somewhere between the ale and the fading song, when the person next to you didn't look at you, just nodded, as if they understood, even if they didn't, just like you did with them. You stand up, not because you need to go anywhere, but because your back is starting to feel numb, like that splintered old chair in your memory. On the table, there's an empty cup. You don't remember drinking from it. But you know, it's the last cup of the morning. No foam, no flavor, just the faint trace of your lips, already fading. Like everything true, it never lingers loudly. You exhale, long, slow, and in the fog of your breath, you see it again. That little tavern, the old fire, the storyteller's voice, the oddly comforting dampness, and a world that wasn't perfect, but warm enough to miss. Chapter 22. Midnight Sounds, when what wakes you isn't a dream, but a mouse in sandals. Night in the Middle Ages wasn't like night now. There were no streetlights, no traffic, no car alarms, no neighbor's TV, no phone whispering its dying battery. Just a sound. The kind of sound you couldn't quite tell was real, or just the echo of a sleep-starved imagination. It came from somewhere. The roof, a corner, maybe under your bed. And it always arrived precisely at the moment you'd sunk into your third dream, right when you were about to kiss a princess or at least finally eat your fill. Thump, thump. No one ever knows what it is. Maybe a mouse. Maybe a neighbor who's forgotten how to walk quietly. Or maybe your house itself, recalling its youth, making noises to remind you it's still here. You open your eyes. Darkness, and as deep as the inside of a bowl that's never been washed. You listen. Silence. Then again, thump. You're not afraid, just annoyed. You were tired, wrapped in your straw blanket, frizzy and stiff, like a 2-week-old loaf of bread. And you'd finally fallen asleep. And now, you're awake, just to hear something cross the ceiling like it's rehearsing for a lion dance. You sit up, not to fight, just to glare into the void and silently curse the entire ecosystem living in your walls. The footsteps fade, then silence. You exhale, lie back, pull up your blanket, close your eyes, thud. This time, it sounds like someone dropped a sack of potatoes upstairs. You sit up again and think, if it's a ghost, just get on with it. No need to drag it out. If it's a mouse, it should know the nighttime code. No racing after 10 p.m. You step out of bed. Feet hit the cold floor. The wood creaks as if to ask, "You sure? It's cold out there." You walk to the door. No light switch. Because there's no light, you bring a stick with you, half for defense, half for the feeling of responsibility. The sound has stopped. You stand in the middle of the room, in the dark, in the middle of thoughts that don't really help. Is the mouse judging me? Is it afraid of me the way I'm afraid of it? Do mice get insomnia? You return to bed. Climb in. Blanket up. But you can't sleep now, because that sound, it's not just a sound anymore, it's an idea. A tiny crack in the night where sleep falls through like sand. And now you begin to hear more. Not sounds exactly, but presences. Things that were always there. The breathing of the person next to you, deep, steady, like wind curling through dry leaves. A faint scratch, could be a cat itching, or a mouse sending Morse code. The wind outside the wall, a thin whistle like the voice of someone who lived here 50 years ago and still hasn't left. You don't sleep. You just lie there and think about the night, about people, about how medieval folks survived without 8 hours of sleep. Maybe because they knew. What makes you tired isn't lack of sleep, but trying to sleep while everything's still making noise. You close your eyes, not to rest, but to look deeper into that quiet symphony of midnight sounds. Outside, the rain has stopped, but the roof still drips, as if the night itself is slowly leaking into all the corners of your thoughts. You think about the tavern. Does it have midnight sounds? Maybe the clink of forgotten mugs. Maybe someone snoring with their face in bread. Maybe just the wind, wandering into a place that never really closes. You smile. A silent smile. The kind worn by people awake for no particular reason. And then, just as your eyelids grow heavy, as you almost forget you're lying on a warped board under a scratchy straw blanket with a pillow stuffed with rags, thump again. But this time, you don't get up. You just mumble, "Walk quietly, little mouse." Some of us are trying to survive a sleepy century without your footsteps. And then, you sleep. Not peacefully, but truthfully. Chapter 23. The Art of Doing Nothing in the Dark, when the best thing you can do is nothing at all. There was a survival skill highly valued in the Middle Ages. Not horseback riding, not hunting, not tax evasion, but simply doing nothing. Especially at night, when every sound felt suspicious, every shadow might contain something that shouldn't be found, and every movement carried the risk of bothering your future self. Back then, doing nothing was an art. Still, dark, usually accompanied by the scent of damp straw. You lie there, not asleep, not fully awake, just existing, like a log placed in a fireplace, not burning, not noticed. You don't move. Because every time you do, the bed creaks. And when the bed creaks, the mouse thinks you're calling it. And once the mouse shows up, sleep becomes a distant luxury. No one taught you how to do nothing. Mainly because they were too busy doing nothing to write it down. But you learn, night by night. Each one stretching out like thin soup, reheated with patience and a dash of resignation. You learn how to stay still. Not for meditation, but because it's cold and straw blankets don't stretch. Every twist invites a draft right where you least want it. You learn to think slowly, not for depth, but because quick thoughts remind you that you're still hungry. You learn to count your breaths, not for enlightenment, but because it's the only activity that doesn't make noise. You lie there and let the night pass over you like a stream, cold, slow. It doesn't carry fish, but it carries the quiet truth. You don't have to do anything to deserve the right to breathe. You start to hear the night, not as sounds, but as rhythm, like the soft applause of the universe for those brave enough not to try. The wind slips through thatched cracks, drawing quiet curves across your back. The rain falls, drip by drip, like someone testing how to write a love letter in water. The breathing beside you, steady, slow, never asking, "Why aren't you asleep yet?" You think about life, but not deeply. Just enough to remember, you need to wake up early tomorrow, though you don't know what for. Maybe to spread compost. Maybe to apologize for taking someone else's bucket. Maybe just to keep doing nothing. But outside this time, You think about the tavern. Not because you crave beer, but because it's the only place where sitting in silence for hours still counts as social interaction. You sigh, not out of sadness, just to confirm you're still here. And then you wonder, maybe our ancestors didn't survive because they were stronger or smarter, but because they knew when to lie still. In a time without Wi-Fi, no films, no next episode button, lying in the dark became a form of entertainment, a kind of healing, and sometimes a quiet prayer. You smile. No one sees it, but you know it's the smile of someone who understands doing nothing isn't laziness. Doing nothing is how you tell the world, for now I choose not to participate. And so you stay still. No tossing, no talking, no deep thoughts, just breathing. And eventually, you fall asleep without noticing. The sleep isn't deep or beautiful. There are no princesses, no quests, no rewards, but you wake up the next morning, still alive, still intact, and oddly, a little lighter. Not because you had a lovely dream, but because you did absolutely nothing for 8 straight hours, and no one complained. And in the Middle Ages, that's a victory. Chapter 24. You slept. That's the miracle. There was no lullaby to send you into sleep. No harp. No bird song. No gentle nun whispering, "Rest now, child." Just the wind, the rain, and the sound of your bed frame offering commentary on your weight. Blunt, judgmental, and grammatically unnecessary. But still, you slept. Not because you tried, not because you deserved it, but because, in one very small, very quiet, and completely unjustified moment, you let go. You let go of the cold. Let go of your thoughts about that cabbage soup that needed more salt. Let go of remembering what you had to wake up early for tomorrow. And just like that, you slid into sleep the way one slips into a haystack, a little painful, but softer than expected. In the Middle Age, sleep wasn't a habit. It was an achievement. There were no spring mattresses, no memory foam, no mosquito nets, no whispering hum of a modern air purifier. Just a creaky wooden bed, a patchwork blanket sewn from 3 generations of repurposed cloth, a pillow stuffed with straw, and a fragile hope that the mouse wouldn't pick you as its landing pad tonight. And yet, you slept. No dreams of dragons, no visions of love, just a quiet dream of standing in a mustard field, under a soft sun, with no one calling you back inside to do laundry. And that was one of the best dreams of the era. Medieval sleep had no REM cycles, no sleep tracking apps, no biometric wristbands, but it had the faint scent of ash. The sound of a sigh leaving your chest as you dropped your body onto a straw mat, and someone in the house whispering, "They're asleep," as if sleep were a triumph, a miracle. A tiny nod from the universe saying, "Today, I'll let you go." You don't know how long you slept, because when you woke, there was no clock. Just faint light peeking through the cracks in the wooden wall, a distant rooster's crow, maybe real, maybe hunger's hallucination, and footsteps of someone relighting the fire. You stay still, not ready to rise, because the feeling of having slept is something you want to stretch out just a little longer, just a little, like holding the last sip of warm water in your mouth, not to drink it, but to feel alive. You think of the night before, not in detail, but with a kind of aftertaste, like leftover ale on your tongue, the smell of old fire in your hair, the faint echo of a laugh from someone in the tavern, someone whose face you no longer recall, but who still has a seat in your memory. You stretch. The bed creaks again. This time, you smile, because the sound is familiar, because it proves you're still here, still you, and still able to wake up. which in the Middle Ages wasn't guaranteed. You step out of bed. Cold feet. Damp floor. A mouse dashes by, as if to say congratulations on surviving the night. You look toward the kitchen. A small flame has been coaxed back to life. Someone is gently blowing on it, fanning with a pot lid. No one speaks. Because in the morning here, greetings are made through fire. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it say, "Take your time." Everything is still here, the whole day. You and something without a name that you'll remember while washing your face. You roll up your sleeves. Lift the cold basin. Wash your face not to wake up, but to say thank you. Thank you for the night that passed, for the tavern that didn't collapse, for the blanket that didn't fall off, and thank you to yourself, the one who did nothing, just breathed and somehow slept. You slept. That's the miracle. Not because someone sang, not because life got lighter, but because, for one night, you allowed yourself not to try. And if tomorrow is hard, if the bed splinters again, if the rain leaks through the roof, if the mouse dances ballet once more, that's okay, because you slept. And you will sleep again. Not because you deserve to, but because you need to. And somewhere, in an old tavern, in a damp kitchen corner, in the calloused curve of a hand, there's still a place for you to lie down. If you want, we can begin a new series about dreams, about the hearth, about philosophical flies or bottomless soup pots. All you have to do is say the word. I'll still be here, like a quiet fire, waiting for embers to rise again. And now, as the fire has gone out, as the splintered wooden chair has stopped complaining, and the tavern's whispers have dissolved into mist, you are still here, sitting quietly, or lying on your side, or curled beneath a blanket that isn't quite long enough, but still warm enough for a night where no one is asking for more. If you've been with us, from the first clink of a mug, through each musty, warm, and slightly ridiculous chapter, through the sounds of mice tiptoeing like tiny thieves, all the way to the moment where you, drifted off, even just for a bit, then I want you to know you've done very well. You didn't need to understand it all. You didn't need to remember it all. You just needed to smile, even once, in the dark. If your heart feels a little lighter, or if your eyelids are slowly falling like a dry blade of grass, leave us a little note. Maybe a quiet, "Yeah." Maybe "I'm still awake," or just a sleepy chicken emoji. And if you'd like to wander with me into other nights, where old fires still flicker, where soup ladles philosophize, where flies debate the meaning of life, and straw occasionally has emotions, then tap that subscribe button and gently ring the bell, as if inviting the tavern keeper to pour you just one more memory. We'll be waiting for you there. No rush, no pressure, just a seat, quietly kept warm, next to the hearth. Now then, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and if you can, sleep. I'll be here, still telling stories, while you dream. May your night be calm, your chest warm, and your sleep never need an explanation. Just sleep. Sleep now.